Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into the fundamental evolution of modern project management. Now, if you've been in this industry for any length of time, you know we've moved way beyond the days of rigid checklists and just basic task tracking. In this explainer, we're going to completely demystify how this profession has transformed from a simple tracking function into a highly dynamic driver of real, overarching business value. It's an exciting shift, so let's get into it.
I want you to think about this for a second. Consider this incredibly provocative question straight from the 2022 Project Management Body of Knowledge. Do projects just produce outputs, or do they drive outcomes that deliver value? We're using this as our hook today because it just completely shatters those outdated legacy ideas of what project management is. We aren't just building a software tool or throwing up a building anymore. No, we're intentionally driving outcomes that can actually change the entire trajectory of an organization.
So, here's our roadmap for the journey today. We're going to move from micro to macro. We'll start with the definition and evolution of value, look at some frameworks for delivery, dive into the Agile mindset and its principles, and then we'll zoom out to look at organizational structures and the broader global business environment. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Definition and Evolution, from rigid tasks to value delivery.
Look at how much things have changed. This timeline beautifully illustrates the chronological shift of the entire profession. Let's travel back to 1969, when the Project Management Institute was founded. The focus back then was super technical. You applied knowledge, tools, and techniques just to meet strict requirements, basically checking the boxes. But by 2001, the Agile Manifesto came along and completely flipped the script, prioritizing human values over rigid processes. Fast forward to 2022, and we are operating on a holistic systems view. The focus is entirely on driving organizational value and delivering benefits, not just finishing up a list of tasks.
Now that we actually know what a modern project is meant to achieve, let's jump into Section 2, Frameworks for Value Delivery, Choosing Your Approach. It's really fascinating to contrast the sheer predictability of a legacy plan-based approach with the fluid adaptability of a change-based approach. The plan-based or predictive approach operates linearly. You finish one phase completely before starting the very next one, which means all that amazing value is only realized at the very end when you finally hand over the product. The change-based or agile approach completely changes the game. It uses iterative development and constant customer feedback loops, so you're actually delivering value continuously throughout the life of the project, enthusiastically adapting to changes instead of fearing them.
To support these totally different frameworks, whether you're predictive, agile, or a hybrid of both, a lot of organizations utilize a project management office, or PMO. But PMOs aren't a one-size-fits-all deal. They sit on a spectrum. You might have a supportive PMO that just supplies best practice templates. Step it up and you get a controlling PMO that actively audits your compliance. Go even further to the extreme and you hit a directive PMO that literally manages the shared resources themselves. Or if you're in a highly adaptive organization, you might see an Agile Center of Excellence. Their goal isn't to micromanage, but to enable and really coach teams on building that Agile mindset.
And speaking of that mindset, let's roll right into Section 3, Principles and Agile Mindset, Internalizing the Values. Let's see how this builds into the core philosophies that reshaped our industry. To really wrap our heads around that mindset, we're breaking the 12 principles of Agile into two parts so it's not overwhelming. Notice how these first 6 heavily prioritize human interaction and extreme flexibility. The absolute highest priority? Satisfying the customer early and continuously. We aren't locking in a scope document on day 1 and refusing to budge. We actually want changing requirements because it gives our customer a competitive advantage in the real world. We're prioritizing working software, daily collaboration, empowering motivated individuals, and really leaning into face-to-face conversations. It's an incredibly human-centric way of working. Now, looking at the back half of the list, the emphasis starts to shift towards sustainability, constant reflection, and honestly, the sheer brilliance of simplicity. Working product is still the ultimate measure of progress, but look closely at Principle 8, promote a sustainable development pace indefinitely. Because let's face it, burnout is the absolute enemy of value creation. You also see a massive focus on technical excellence, the power of self-organizing teams, and taking the time to actually stop, reflect, and adjust behaviors. And a real standout here is simplicity, which they define beautifully as the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. How great is that? Here's the kicker, though. There is a massive fundamental difference between simply doing Agile and actually being Agile. If you're just working in short iterations and collecting stakeholder feedback, sure, you're going through the Agile mechanics, but true, sustained success, that only comes from being Agile.
This means you've deeply internalized those 12 values we just went over. You've adopted a flexible, change-friendly mindset, and you actually know how to tailor these practices to the unique context of your specific project. It's not just a rule book you read, it's a completely different way of thinking.
Okay, mindset is locked in. Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, organizational structures, the matrix of power, where we'll see how your company's overarching setup directly dictates your daily reality. Think of organizational project management, or OPM, as a living, breathing ecosystem designed specifically for strategy execution. At the very top, you have these massive portfolios, groups of programs and projects aligned to high-level corporate goals. Those portfolios break down into specific programs, which are just coordinated efforts to get benefits you couldn't achieve if you managed things separately. And finally, those programs trickle all the way down into your specific projects. Knowing exactly where your project sits in this vast blueprint is absolutely crucial to understanding the true value you are meant to deliver. But here's the real question. How much power do you actually have to deliver that value? Well, this matrix is incredibly revealing, because your actual authority depends entirely on where you sit in the corporate hierarchy. If you're in a functional structure, think traditional, siloed departments like marketing or IT, your team's loyalty is strictly to their department head. As a project manager, your authority is practically non-existent. In a matrix organization, loyalty is conflicted between the department manager and you, so you have medium or shared authority. But if you're lucky enough to sit in a project-oriented structure, the team's loyalty is 100% to the project. Your authority is high, and you are acting in a full-time, highly responsible role. You really have to know the game board you're playing on. All right, for our final perspective shift, let's zoom all the way out. Welcome to Section 5, the business environment, navigating the global ecosystem. Every single project, no matter how tiny, is subject to massive invisible forces. First up, we have enterprise environmental factors, or EEFs. These are the strict constraints totally outside your team's control. We're talking global market conditions, sudden government regulations, or even your company's IT infrastructure. They actively constrain and direct your project. On the flip side, we have organizational process assets, or OPAs. These are your best friends. They're the helpful internal resources, the treasure trove of historical knowledge, proven templates, and corporate policies that you implicitly rely on to get your work done efficiently. So how do you survive and actually thrive in this crazy external environment? Professionals use specific frameworks to systematically analyze risks and opportunities. You might use PESTLE to scan the political, economic, and sociocultural landscape, or maybe TCOAT for technical and commercial factors. But whatever you do, you absolutely must understand VUCA. We live in a world entirely defined by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Ignoring these external factors is basically a guaranteed way to build a gorgeous, perfect product that the market completely doesn't need by the time you launch it. So, with all that said, how do you possibly manage the agile mindset, internal power struggles, and a volatile global market all at the exact same time? The answer is the PMI talent triangle. This represents the triad of skills required by today's changemakers. It is no longer enough to just know the ways of working, whether that's predictive or adaptive. You have to seamlessly blend that technical methodology with power skills. Those are the critical interpersonal abilities to lead, influence, and build relationships. And finally, you wrap the whole thing in deep business acumen, ensuring every decision you make strategically aligns with global business trends.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for this explainer. I want you to think about your current project right now, the one sitting right there on your desk, and ask yourself this final crucial question. Do you know your organization's strategic plan and how your specific project goals matter to that long-term vision? Because in the modern paradigm we've just unpacked, if your daily tasks aren't directly tied to the overarching strategy of the business, you aren't truly delivering value. Challenge yourself to find that connection today. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and hey, keep driving those outcomes.